Hey guys, my name's Tiana, and this is my presentation on the environmental movement. To begin, I support the environmental movement because I have always loved the outdoors. Although the modern environmental movement occurred in the 60s and 70s, the climate movement, which is a current wave of the environmental movement, has become increasingly more important in politics. Global climate change is a big issue in our world that often gets ignored. I was inspired to make a difference after fires in California caused schools across the state to close. I've also been inspired by other young climate activists, such as Greta Thunberg. I know that if the U.S. does not take action now to help our environment, these disasters will only get worse. I was driven to make a difference in my community. I chose the environmental movement for my social movement because I really wanted to learn more about the history of this movement. So, when did the environmental movement take place? The environmental movement took place in the 1960s and 1970s, but the present-day climate movement is still going on today. The first Earth Day was on April 22, 1970. Some of the main political actors of the environmental movement were Rachel Carson, Gaylord Nelson, and Robert Bullard. One of the main political actors was Rachel Carson. According to PBS, Rachel Carson was the catalyst of the modern environmental movement. Rachel Carson was a biologist who published her book Silent Spring in 1962. Silent Spring focuses on criticizing the overuse of pesticides. She brought attention to the harmful effects of pesticides on not only the environment, but also on human health. According to PBS, the amount of DDT, a harmful chemical compound, found in human tissue had tripled between 1950 and 1962. Although Carson's book caused more people to support environmental legislation, many people opposed her findings. The chemical industry refers to her book as a gross distortion of actual facts. Despite these oppositions, President John F. Kennedy ordered his Science Advisory Committee to review Silent Spring's claims. This committee confirmed that Carson's results were correct. Rachel Carson brought attention to environmental problems through her book. Gaylord Nelson, a U.S. Senator of Wisconsin, was also an important leader in this movement. According to the Wilderness Society, Nelson is best known as the father of Earth Day. He created the first Earth Day on April 22, 1970, which was made as a protest against environmental ignorance. As a senator, Nelson passed environmental legislation, including the Wilderness Act. His actions led to the creation of more environmental laws and more awareness. Robert Bullard is known as the father of environmental justice. Robert Bullard discovered that communities with more racial minorities suffered more from hazardous toxins. According to American Government in Black and White, Bullard found that all of the city-owned landfills in Houston were in black neighborhoods, even though blacks only made up 25% of the population. In an interview with Errol Schweitzer, Robert Bullard explains how environmental justice is the intersection between race issues and environmental issues. He says, "The environmental justice movement has basically redefined what environmentalism is all about. It basically says that the environment is everything, where we live, work, play, go to school, as well as the physical and natural world. And so we can't separate the physical environment from the cultural environment. We have to talk about making sure that justice is integrated throughout all of the stuff that we do." So the objective of the environmental movement was to pass legislation that protects the environment and prevents future damage to the natural world. Before the environmental movement, issues pertaining to the environment were often ignored because they were not seen as a direct threat to humans. An important part of this movement was raising awareness and bringing attention to these environmental problems. So, where was the environmental movement? Since the environmental movement was mainly focused on the negative effects of pollution and hazardous toxins, the urban areas of the U.S. were most affected by this movement. However, protests took place all across America. Pollution in the cities resulted in smog that could be deadly. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines smog as a fog made heavier and darker by smoke and chemical fumes. These fumes harmed the lives of many Americans in urban areas. According to Michigan in the World, hundreds of people died because of the harmful results of smog in the 60s and 70s. Early movements and catalysts. The earlier environmental movement, called the conservation movement, took place in the U.S. from the 1890s to the 1920s, while the modern environmental movement was in the 1960s and 1970s. In this earlier movement, President Theodore Roosevelt helped to establish national parks and national forests in the U.S. However, the modern environmental movement shifted attention away from preservation and resource management. The modern environmental movement began to focus on the effects of pollution and toxins on the human quality of life. The main catalyst of the environmental movement was Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, which really helped to bring awareness to the many environmental issues. One very important event in the environmental movement was the first Earth Day in 1970. Here is a video from CBS News of the first Earth Day in Philadelphia.
This is a CBS News special. Earth Day, a question of survival.
Fairmount Park in Philadelphia today is much like a rock music festival as a teach-in on the environment. A few older people, a few blacks, and some of the poor, but mainly white middle-class young people, as much aroused by the music as by the damage done to the environment by pollution. This is Philadelphia on Earth Day.
Welcome, sulfur dioxide. Hello, carbon monoxide.
Welcome, sulfur dioxide. Hello, carbon monoxide. A song from the worldwide hit musical Hair. It was one of the first hints suggesting that young people were beginning to care as much about the environment as they do about the peace movement and civil rights. Their dream for the age of Aquarius was to let the sunshine in. Let the sunshine in. This is what keeps the sun from shining in on Philadelphia. Hundreds of tons of soot, smoke, fly ash, dust, sulfur dioxide, hydrocarbons, metal fumes, organic matter, odors and malodors on each and every day. And it all comes from places like this, the city's top 10 polluters. Power plants, oil refineries, the city incinerators, chemical plants, coke ovens, smelting operations. And that's just in the air. The city's rivers offer a whole new dimension of pollution. So much noxious waste is involved that some people here have begun to call their city Filthydelphia. But it's pretty much what you would expect to find in any major American city. Public reaction against this kind of thing caused a comparatively small group, mainly college students, to try to put together not just an Earth Day, but an Earth Week to arouse the city about the problems of pollution here.
As you can see from this video, pollution was very dangerous in Philadelphia and other urban areas, and this led people to support the environmental movement. This video also shows how the majority of the supporters were young people. Another important event was the establishment of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. NOAA was established on October 2, 1970, to regulate and improve the oceans. NOAA is an agency within the Department of Commerce. According to NOAA.gov, this organization researches the surface of the sun to the depths of the ocean floor, as they work to keep the public informed of the changing environment around them. And these are just a few of the many important events that occurred in the environmental movement. So I am pretty involved in the present-day climate movement, which pertains to the issues of the earlier environmental movement. Today, the environmental movement is more related to global climate change. I've participated in local climate strikes and marches in Grass Valley and Nevada City. These strikes involve advocating for a Green New Deal. Introduced by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Senator Edward J. Markey of Massachusetts, the Green New Deal is a plan to combat climate change. This plan aims to create new, high-paying jobs in clean energy industries. According to the New York Times, not only does the Green New Deal focus on environmental justice, but it plans to fix societal problems like economic inequality and racial injustice. Unfortunately, this plan has not passed yet. Despite scientists proving that we have limited time to combat climate change, many government officials, mostly conservatives, see it as a socialist takeover. Donald Trump has ignored the facts when it comes to climate change, and he has said multiple times that he thinks it's a hoax, and sometimes he has blamed the environmental problems on China. Trump tweeted, "The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive." Recently, I joined the Sunrise Movement Strike Circle at my high school, which is a grassroots, youth-led organization to strike and raise awareness for global climate change. We planned to get the school to strike on the 50th Annual Earth Day on April 22, 2020. This date was planned to be a nationwide strike that we would participate for in Grass Valley. My role in this was to walk around my school with pledge sheets to convince other high schoolers to pledge to strike on Earth Day. Unfortunately, the Earth Day strike was canceled due to the global pandemic. The Sunrise Movement still has other plans for Nevada County, such as small silent strikes and a proposal for the county to declare a state of emergency. In addition to the Sunrise Movement, I co-founded the Climate Change Club at my school with my friend. This club's goal is to spread awareness in my community. However, our goals in the club were also postponed due to the pandemic. So, the environmental movement's impact on America. Overall, the laws passed resulting from the environmental movement had a huge impact on Americans. Before some of these laws, people struggled with disease caused by pollution of the air and water. Also, cancer was very common as a result of the depleting ozone layer. The success of environmental legislation helped prevent these problems. However, America still has a long way to go, as it is clear that we are still struggling with environmental problems. So many laws were passed as a result of the environmental movement. Some of the most important laws were the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Montreal Protocol. So to begin, the Environmental Protection Agency, established in 1970, was created to organize responses to environmental problems. This agency was created by President Nixon. Nixon was very concerned about the condition of the environment, and he presented an important message to Congress, asking for billions of dollars to protect the environment. According to EPA.gov, the Environmental Protection Agency could conduct research, monitor the environment, and set and enforce standards for water and air quality. This agency is still active today, helping to keep our environment clean. Additionally, the Clean Air Act, passed in 1970 and later amended, prevented air pollution and promoted public health. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Clean Air Act gave the Environmental Protection Agency the power it needed to take action to prevent pollution. So another important law passed was the Endangered Species Act, created in 1966. The purpose of this act was to protect species that were in danger of extinction. According to PBS, this act gave $15 million each year to the Department of the Interior to protect endangered species. These species would be listed by the Secretary of the Interior. The first list of endangered species, created in 1967, included the United States national symbol, the bald eagle. Peter Galvin, the conservation director for the Center of Biological Diversity, says that the greatest accomplishment of the Endangered Species Act is that no species has gone extinct after being listed. According to ABC News, the Montreal Protocol is considered the most successful international agreement. This protocol was signed in 1987 and ratified by 196 nations. The goal of this was to phase out ozone-depleting substances by the year 2000. This prevents harmful ultraviolet radiation from entering Earth's atmosphere. This helped decrease the number of skin cancer cases that were caused by harmful radiation. This international agreement was extremely successful. According to ABC News, the ozone layer has not grown thinner since 1998. Additionally, this has helped slow climate change. So this graph shows the decrease of ozone-depleting substances in the world from 1989 to 2014. As you can see from this graph, there's a huge decrease. The Montreal Protocol, passed in 1987, contributed greatly to this decrease. The legacy of the environmental movement. Many of the laws and organizations created at the time of the environmental movement are still in effect today. This movement really helped to raise awareness for environmental problems and sought to end environmental ignorance. In an editorial, James Morton Turner, an associate professor of environmental studies at Wellesley College, and Andrew Eisenberg, a professor of American history at the University of Kansas, wrote about the legacy of the movement. They said, in 2010, the Clean Air Act and its 1,990 amendments were estimated to prevent 3.2 million lost school days, 13 million lost work days, and 160,000 premature deaths. They wrote, the Clean Air Act is responsible for substantial declines in most major water pollutants. Scientists estimate that the Endangered Species Act has prevented the extinction of 291 species and helped 39 species to a full recovery. So while these pieces of legislation are still in effect today, President Donald Trump has tried to weaken environmental policies. According to NBC News, Trump has tried to reduce protections for endangered species and change the way the Endangered Species Act is applied. Additionally, Trump has taken back clean water regulations. According to the New York Times, these are just a few of the changes made by President Trump. In fact, there are 100 total environmental laws that were reversed or weakened since Trump took office. This chart from the New York Times shows the 68 completed laws that the Trump administration has reversed, and there are 32 more laws that are in progress of getting reversed. The Trump administration's goal to weaken environmental legislation has caused more problems to the environment. So, in conclusion, the modern environmental movement caused laws and agencies to take action to help the environment. This social movement really helped to raise awareness of the dangerous effects of pollution on human health. Overall, this movement was a success and helped create a healthier environment. However, this movement still has a long way to go to address the current environmental problems. I believe that the movement will both devolve and evolve in the future. The movement is currently devolving, with the Trump administration trying to reverse policies created by the environmental movement. However, there is still hope for the movement to evolve. Young people around the world are skipping school or going on strike to demand for climate legislation. According to Nature.com, about 1.6 million kids in 125 countries protested on the streets in March of 2019. From the fires in California to the increased hurricanes in the Caribbean, climate change is becoming an increasingly greater threat to humanity. It is truly up to our generation to demand climate regulations such as the Green New Deal and continue to raise awareness for environmental problems before it's too late. So that's all for my presentation on the environmental movement. Thanks so much for watching.